Hello, boys and girls. My name is Aunt Lucinda, and I'm going to introduce the next book to you. The book is called Spiderwick, the Field Guide, and it's about my great nieces and nephews. They move into my old house, which is a Victorian, meaning it was built in the 1800s. And some mysterious things start to happen. They keep hearing noises in the walls, and they don't know what that is. Could it be a ghost? Could it be a squirrel? Could it be something else? So, the last book you read with Coach Hyatt was a realistic fiction book. But this book is not really realistic fiction, because there's going to be some things that happen that can't happen in our world. There are some words that we have to go over while we're listening to the book. And the first word is acquainted. Well, the kids are learning about their new house and seeing their new house for the first time. So they're learning about it, getting to know it. Fencer is another word you're going to hear. And a fencer is someone who's an athlete. And their sport is sort of sword fighting. Garish is another word you're going to hear. Garish means tacky. Something that doesn't look very good, that even could be called ugly. I already talked about Victorian. That's a house that was built in the 1800s, so very old. Indeterminate. Indeterminate is something that you can't really tell what it is. It's very hard to tell. It's uncertain. Crevices. Those are small cracks or openings in something, like a wall or a door. And eerie. Eerie just means strange, spooky, or creepy. Another word you're going to hear is frayed. Frayed means something that is shredded or torn. Inherited. Yes, you've heard that word in another book that's been read online, The Bad Beginning. Inherited just means someone is going to get some money or property or a car, something like that of value, from someone who had died. And then tentative. That's an unsure thing, something that you're cautious about, hesitant about doing. And you're going to hear all of these words. Remember, my great niece and nephews are going through a hard time. So, be very kind to them. They're not acting very nice. So if they surprise you with their behavior, I'm sorry. And hopefully you'll find out what is making all the noises in the walls. And also, they think I'm completely insane. Well, I do live in a nut house, as they say, and that's a hospital where people who maybe have mental problems live. So, am I or am I not? Now you get to meet the Grace children in just a moment, and I hope you enjoy the story. The Spiderwick Chronicles, Book 1, The Field Guide, by Toni DiTerlizzi and Holly Black. Map of the Spiderwick estate and surrounding areas. Chapter 1, in which the Grace children get acquainted with their new home. If someone had asked Jared Grace what job his brother and sister would have when they grew up, he would have had no trouble replying. He would have said that his brother, Simon, would be either a veterinarian or a lion tamer. He would have said that his sister, Mallory, would either be an Olympic fencer or in jail for stabbing someone with a sword. But he couldn't say what job he would grow up to have. Not that anyone asked him. Not that anyone asked his opinion on anything at all. The new house, for instance. Jared Grace looked up at it and squinted. Maybe it would look better, blurry. "It's a shack," Mallory said, getting out of the station wagon. It wasn't really, though. It was more like a dozen shacks had been piled on top of one another. There were several chimneys, and the whole thing was topped off by a strip of iron fencing sitting on the roof like a particularly garish hat. "Oh, it's not so bad," their mother said with a smile that looked only slightly forced. "It's Victorian." Simon, Jared's identical twin, didn't look upset. He was probably thinking of all the animals he could have now. Actually, considering what he'd packed into their tiny bedroom in New York, Jared figured it would take a lot of rabbits and hedgehogs and whatever else was out there to satisfy Simon. "Come on, Jared," Simon called. Jared realized that they had all crossed to the front steps, and he was alone on the lawn staring at the house. The doors were faded gray, worn with age. The only traces of paint were an indeterminate cream, stuck deep in the crevices around the hinges. A rusted ram's head door knocker hung from a single heavy nail at its center. Their mother fit a jagged key into the lock, turned it, and shoved hard with her shoulder. The door opened into a dim hallway. The only window was halfway up the stairs, and its stained glass panes gave the walls an eerie, reddish glow. "It's just like I remember," she said, smiling. "Yeah, only crappier," said Mallory. Their mother sighed, but didn't otherwise respond. The hallway led into a dining room. A long table with faded water spots was the only piece of furniture. The plaster ceiling was cracked in places, and a chandelier hung from frayed wires. "Why don't you three start bringing things in from the car?" their mother said. "Into here?" Jared asked. "Yes, into here." Their mother put down the suitcase on the table, ignoring the eruption of dust. "If your Great Aunt Lucinda hadn't let us stay, I don't know where we would have gone. We should be grateful." None of them said anything. Try as he might, Jared didn't feel anything close to grateful. Ever since their dad moved out, everything had gone bad. He'd messed up at school, and the fading bruise over his left eye wouldn't let him forget it. But this place was the worst yet. "Jared," his mother said as he turned to follow Simon out to unload the car. "What?" His mother waited until the other two were down the hall before she spoke. "This is a chance to start over for all of us, okay?" Jared nodded grudgingly. He didn't need her to say the rest of it, that the only reason he hadn't gotten kicked out of school was because they were moving anyway. Another reason was he was supposed to be grateful, only he wasn't. Outside, Mallory had stacked 2 suitcases on top of a steamer trunk. "I heard she's starving herself to death." "Aunt Lucinda? She's just old," said Simon. "Old and crazy." But Mallory shook her head. "I heard Mom on the phone, and she was telling Uncle Terrence that Aunt Lucy thinks little men bring her food." "Well, what do you expect? She's in a nut house," Jared said. Mallory went on like this, like she hadn't heard him. "She told the doctors the food she got was better than anything they'd ever taste." "You're making that up." Simon crawled into the back seat and opened one of the suitcases. Mallory shrugged. If she dies, this place is going to get inherited by someone and we're going to have to move out again. Well, maybe we can go back to the city, Jared said. That chance, said Simon. He looked up. He took out a wad of tube socks. Oh no, Jeffrey and Lemondrop chewed their way loose. Mom told you not to bring the mice, Mallory said. She said you could have normal animals now. If I let them go, they'd get stuck in a glue trap or something, said Simon, turning a sock inside out, one finger sticking out a hole. Besides, you brought all your fencing junk. It's not junk, Mallory growled, and it's not alive. Shut up! Jared took a step toward his sister. Just because you got one black eye doesn't mean I can't give you another one. Mallory flipped her ponytail as she turned toward him. She shoved a heavy suitcase into his hands. Go ahead and carry that if you're so tough. Even though Jared knew he might be bigger and stronger than her someday, when she wasn't 13 and he wasn't 9, it was hard to picture. Jared managed to lug the suitcase inside the door before he dropped it. He figured he could drag it the rest of the way if he had to, and no one would be the wiser. Alone in the hallway of the house, however, Jared no longer remembered how to get to the dining room. 2 different hallways split off this one, winding deep into the middle of the house. Mom? Although he'd meant to call out loudly, his voice sounded very soft, even to himself. Mom? No answer. He took a tentative step, and then another, until the creak of a board under his feet stopped him. Just as he paused, something inside the wall rustled. He could hear it scrabbling upward until the sound disappeared past the ceiling. His heart beat hard against his chest. It's probably just a squirrel, he told himself. After all, the house looked like it was falling apart. Anything could be living inside. They'd be lucky if there wasn't a bear in the basement and birds in all the heating ducts. That was, if the place even had heat. Mom? He said again, even more faintly. Then the door behind him opened and Simon came in, carrying mason jars with 2 bug-eyed gray mice in them. Mallory was right behind him, scowling. I heard something, Jared said. In the wall. What? Simon asked. I don't know. Jared didn't want to admit that for a moment he thought it was a ghost. Probably a squirrel. Simon looked at the wall with interest. Brocaded gold wallpaper hung limply, peeling and pocking in places. You think so? In the house, I always wanted a squirrel. No one seemed to think that something in the walls was anything to worry about, so Jared didn't say anything more about it. But as he carried the suitcase to the dining room, Jared couldn't help thinking about their tiny apartment in New York and their family before the divorce. He wished this was some kind of gimmicky vacation and not real life. Well, boys and girls, we just finished chapter 1, and there's many, many things going on in this story. Let me ask you first, why are all the children upset? What has happened in their family that has thrown them all for an emotional loop? Also, why is Jared having the hardest time with everything that's going on? What has happened to him at school? And why is his mother trying to make him be more positive? Also, why have they moved to this old Victorian house of mine? And they've said many things about me. Do you think I'm crazy? And the noises Jared is hearing, what do you think of those? Do you think it is a squirrel? Do you think it is a ghost? Or could it be something else? I wonder. Now, there are a few words in chapter 2 that you're going to need to know. And the first word is knickknacks. The children are going to be going on some explorations, and they're going to find out a little bit more about what might be in the walls. Now, knickknacks are just like little statues Cheap little things that people like to put out for decoration. Next thing you need to know about is Demented. Now, Demented means crazy. It also can mean insane. And the kids, that's kind of what they think of me. And they find a dumbwaiter. Dumbwaiters, those are things that used to be in old houses. And it's kind of like a little elevator that goes up to the next floor where they could bring food and different things like that up there. And it would go up or down. And erratically, that's another word you're going to hear today. And that just means something that is not happening in a pattern, that it goes up and down erratically or side to side erratically. So there's no really regular pattern. And it's something that happens kind of by chance. Also, what have the children said about me, Aunt Lucinda? Mallory seemed to have a lot of information about me. What did I tell the doctors? And what do you think of all that? Now, there's lots of mysteries going on in this story, so maybe you're thinking, this is a mystery. Well, partly it is. But there's going to be some other stuff coming up that would make it a different type of book besides a mystery. So continue to listen and watch, and I hope you can figure out what is happening in the walls of this old Victorian. The creak startled him into jerking upright. Chapter 2, in which 2 walls are explored by vastly different methods. The leaks in the roof had made all but 3 of the upstairs bedrooms' floors dangerously rotted. Their mother got 1 bedroom, Mallory got another, and Jared and Simon were left to share the 3rd. By the time they were done unpacking, the dressers and nightstands of Simon's side of the room were covered in glass tanks. A few were filled with fish. The rest were crammed with mice, lizards, and other animals that Simon had confined to mud-furnished cages. Their mother had told Simon he could bring everything but the mice. She thought they were disgusting because Simon had rescued them from a trap in Mrs. Levitt's downstairs apartment. She pretended not to notice that he'd brought them anyway. Jared tossed and turned on the lumpy mattress, pressing the pillow down over his head like he was smothering himself, but he couldn't sleep. He didn't mind sharing a room with Simon, but sharing a room with cages of animals that rustled, squeaked, and scratched was eerier than sleeping alone would have been. It made him think of the thing in the walls. He'd shared a room with Simon and the critters in the city, but the animal noises had dimmed against the background of cars and sirens and people. Here, everything was unfamiliar. The creak of hinges startled him into jerking upright. There was a figure in the doorway with a shapeless white gown and long dark hair. Jared slid off the bed so fast he didn't remember doing it. "It's just me," the figure whispered. It was Mallory, in a nightgown. "I think I heard your creature, your squirrel." Jared stood up from a crouch, trying to decide if moving so fast meant he was a chicken, or if he just had good reflexes. Simon was snoring gently in the other bed. Mallory put her hand on her hips. "Come on, it's not going to wait around for us to catch it." Jared shook his twin's shoulder. "Simon, wake up! New pet! New pet!" Simon twitched and groaned, trying to pull the covers over his head. Mallory laughed. "Simon!" Jared leaned in close, making his voice deliberately urgent. "Squirrel! Squirrel!" Simon opened his eyes and glared at them. "I was sleeping." "Well, Mom went out to the store for some milk and cereal," Mallory said, pulling the covers off him. "She said I was supposed to keep an eye on you. We don't have much time before she gets back." The 3 siblings crept along the dark hallways of their new house. Mallory was in the lead, walking a few paces and then stopping to listen. Every now and then, there would be a scratch or a sound like small footsteps inside the walls. The scuttling grew louder as they neared the kitchen. In the kitchen sink, Jared could see a pan crusted with the remains of the macaroni and cheese they'd had for dinner. "I think it's there. Listen," Mallory whispered. The sound stopped completely. Mallory picked up a broom and held the wooden end like a baseball bat. "I'm gonna knock it open. I'm gonna knock the wall open," she said. "Mom's gonna see the hole, and when she gets back," Jared said. "In this house? She'll never notice." "Well, what if you hit the squirrel?" Simon asked. "You could hurt." "Shh," Mallory said. She patted across the floor in her bare feet and swung the broom handle at the wall. The blow broke through the plaster, scattering dust like flour. It settled on Mallory's hair, making her look even more ghostly. She reached into the hole and broke off a chunk of the wall. Jared stepped closer. He could feel the hair on his arms stand up. Torn strips of cloth had been wadded up between the boards. As she snapped off more pieces, other things were revealed. The remains of curtains, bits of tattered silk and lace, straight pins poked into the wooden beams on either side, making a strange upward snaking line. A doll's head lolled in the corner. Dead cockroaches were strung up like garlands. Tiny lead soldiers with melted hands and feet were scattered across the planks like a fallen army. Jagged pieces of mirror glittered from where they had been glued with ancient gum. Mallory reached into the nest and took out a fencing medal. It was silver, with a thick blue ribbon. "Hey, this is mine." "Well, the squirrel must have stolen it," Simon said. "No, this is too weird," Jared said. "Well, Diana Beckley had ferrets, and they used to steal her Barbie dolls," Simon replied. "And lots of animals like shiny things." "But look," Jared pointed to the cockroaches. "What ferret makes his own gross knickknacks?" "Let's pull all of this stuff out of here," Mallory said. "Maybe if it doesn't have a nest, it'll be easier to keep it out of the house." Jared hesitated. He didn't want to put his hands inside the wall and feel around. What if it was still in there and bit him? Maybe he didn't know much. But he really didn't think squirrels were normally this creepy. "I don't think we should do that," he said. Mallory wasn't listening. She was busy dragging over a trash can. Simon started pulling out wads of the musty cloth. "Oh, there's no droppings either. That's strange." Simon dumped what he was holding and pulled out another handful at the army men, he stopped. "Well, these are cool, aren't they, Jared?" Jared had to nod. "Yeah, but they'd be better with hands, though." Simon put several in the pocket of his pajamas. "Simon," Jared asked, "have you ever heard of an animal like this? I mean, some of this stuff is really odd, you know? Like this squirrel must be as demented as Aunt Lucy." "Yeah, it's real nutty," Simon said and giggled. Mallory groaned and then suddenly went quiet. "I hear it again." "What?" Jared asked. "The noise. Shh, it's over there." Mallory picked up the broom again. "Quiet," Simon whispered. "We're being quiet," Mallory hissed back. "Shh," Jared said. The three of them crept over to where the sound came from, just as the noise itself changed. Instead of hearing the clatter of little claws scrabbling on wood, they could clearly hear the scrape of nails on metal. "Look!" Simon bent down to touch a small, sliding door set into the wall. "It's a dumbwaiter," Mallory said. "Servants used it to send trays of breakfast and stuff upstairs. There must be another door like this in one of the bedrooms." "That thing sounds like it's in the shaft," Jared said. Mallory leaned her whole body into the metal box. It's too small for me. One of you guys is going to have to go up. Simon looked at her skeptically. I don't know. What if the ropes aren't that good anymore? It would just be a short fall, Mallory said, and both the boys looked at her in astonishment. Oh, fine, I'll go. Jared was pleased to find something Mallory couldn't do. She looked a little bit put out. Simon just looked worried. The inside was dirty, and it smelled like old wood. Jared folded his legs in and bent his head forward. He fit, but only barely. Is the squirrel thing even still in the Dumbwaiter shaft? Simon's voice sounded tinny and distant. I don't know, Jared said softly, listening to echoes of his words. I don't hear anything. Mallory pulled the rope. With a little jolt and some shaking, the dumbwaiter began to move Jared up inside the wall. Can you see anything? No, Jared called. He could hear the scratching sound, but it was distant. It's completely black. Mallory winched the dumbwaiter back down. Well, there's got to be a light around here somewhere. She opened a few drawers until she found the stub of a white candle in a mason jar. Turning a knob on the stove, she lit the wick off one of the gas burners, dripped hot wax into the jar, and pressed the candle against it to hold it in place. Here, Jared, hold this. Mallory, I don't even hear the thing anymore, Simon said. Well, maybe it's hiding, said Mallory, and yanked on the rope. Jared tried to tuck himself deeper into the dumbwaiter, but there was no room. He wanted to tell them that this was stupid and that he'd chickened out, but he said nothing. Instead, he let himself be raised into the darkness, holding the makeshift lantern. The metal box went up a few feet inside the wall. The light from the candle was a small halo, reflecting things erratically. The squirrel thing could have been right next to him, almost touching him, and he would have not noticed it. I don't see anything, he called down, but he wasn't sure if anyone heard him. The ascent was slow. Jared felt like he couldn't breathe. His knees were pressing against his chest, and his feet were cramping from being bent so long. He wondered if the candle was sucking up all the available oxygen. Then, with a jerk, the dumbwaiter stopped. Something scraped against the metal box. It won't go any farther, Mallory called up the chute. Do you see anything? The dumbwaiter began to move. Jared wasn't sure where he was. No, said Jared. I think it's stuck. There was more scraping now, as though something was trying to claw through the top of the dumbwaiter. Jared yelped and tried to pound from the inside, hoping to frighten it off. Just as suddenly, the dumbwaiter slid up an extra few feet and came to a halt again, this time in a room dimly lit by moonlight from a single small window. Jared scrambled out of the box. I made it! I'm upstairs! The room had a low ceiling, and the walls were covered in bookshelves. Looking around, he realized there was no door. All of a sudden, Jared wasn't sure where he was. Chapter 2 is finished. So, what was Jared feeling? Even though he had to share a room with Simon, what things were bothering him, and how did he feel? Then, he sees something standing in his doorway. What does he think that thing is? And how does he react? Later, the children go exploring. They hear the squirrel in the walls, or what they think is a squirrel, who breaks open the wall in the kitchen. And once his character does it, what do they find? What did the character use to break open the wall? Do you still think the creature is an animal? Could it be something else? And who volunteers to go up and explore? And what does he find once he gets there? Next week we will read 2 more chapters of Spiderwick, the Field Guide, and maybe we can find out a little bit more about the mystery of this place. Also, maybe you all can tell me after the next 2 chapters what kind of book this is. Is it realistic fiction? No. Is it mystery? Kind of. And then next week we will get to hear more. And then we'll see what you all think. All right. Enjoy your day, boys and girls. And Aunt Lucinda, I will see you next week.